Homeland Security Secretary and the Secretary of State, they don't understand this, but somehow you do. Is that what you want me as a sheriff, police chief, fill in the blank, state, Congress, whatever it is? Is that what you, and it's actually, I realized it was a legitimate comment, right? So we got, my colleagues and I, these gentlemen, to sign a letter approximately a year ago, a little over a year ago. And they just happened to be Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, founder of Delta Force, but ended his career, his final assignment was as the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. General Soyster, Lieutenant General Soyster, the former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. The Honorable Joe Schmitz, the former Inspector General of the Department of Defense, and the Honorable Jim Woolsey, the former Director of Central Intelligence. And they said this: while all four of us were in senior positions in the U.S. Intelligence community and should have been aware of this information, we were not. We first heard this critical information from the two primary presenters, myself and my colleague. Now here's what I'd like to say. I know all four of these men well, and they're patriots, and they're a lot smarter than me, and they've done a lot more in their lives than I have. These are good men, and they're smart men, and they're patriots. So how did this get by them? And now we come to the crux of why we're here today. Because I want you to hear me. Everyone inside the government that's working with the Muslim Brotherhood isn't necessarily a bad guy or gal. Let me lay this on the table. There are some who know that these people are bad and they're still working with them. That's a different issue. But there are good men and women that are doing it because they think it's right, they think it's outreach. These people are very good. The Muslim Brotherhood is good at what they do. And don't ever underestimate them. But the reason they've gotten so far is because they are nearly totally unopposed. They're unopposed inside the government. They're opposed by people like the United West, by Act for America, by the Center for Security Policy, by fill in any of these organizations at the grassroots level, and some that are now popping up at other levels. It's American citizens that are grouping together to point the finger and say, this is wrong, this is a threat to me and my family, and we need to do something about it. And I want to lay it on the table right now that that is the answer. The answer is sitting in this room. The answer, those of you watching at home, the answer is you and your local police. It's at the local community level that we are either going to win or lose this entire war. And this will make more sense to you towards the end, after lunch, when we're winding down and I'm starting to lay some of that solution out for you as I see it. But this is really, I think it's very important. Now, I'd like to show a video to highlight what I'm saying. And before I do, I want to put this one piece in context. Because everything I do from here on out today, you're going to hear me keep coming back to this. The enemy wants to, primary objective number one is to control the message. That is it. They want to control how Islam is discussed. And I'm talking about the Muslim Brotherhood here. They want to control how Islam is discussed in schools, how religious leaders discuss it, how the State Department handles policy, and across the board, political leaders, media. Their work to date has been phenomenal, and hopefully you'll see that. But again, it's because they've been virtually unopposed. When we put together a strategy, America puts together a strategy, hopefully led by somebody at the national level, they can be relatively easily defeated. The problem is, because we've allowed it to go on so long, they're deeply entrenched in the bureaucracy, and it creates very specific problems as we do go after these terrorists, if you want to call them. I call them jihadis because that's what they call themselves. Controlling the message. If the enemy self-identifies themselves in one way, and they convince our entire leadership that we cannot use any of the words they use to describe themselves, and we cannot identify, we cannot speak about the enemy. We cannot do it. And if you can't speak about the enemy in the terms that define them, then you cannot identify the enemy. And if you can't identify the enemy, you cannot target the enemy to defeat them. If you cannot defeat the enemy, then guess what? You lose and they win. This is not fear-mongering. This is basic and fundamental war fighting. And as we go through, I'm going to try and really hammer this home. They seek to control the message. They want to make sure that anytime anybody in a church, in a synagogue, in a police unit, in the FBI, DHS, anywhere as a federal agent, in a school, on a university campus, in the media, starts laying these facts out, their entire strategy is to get our leadership to say, hey, you need to shut your mouth. And if you've been watching the last 4 months, you've noticed that last week we had senators and senior leaders in our government telling other people inside the government that they were hateful because they were using facts to ask that certain things be looked into. Inside the FBI, this discussion has been completely shut down, and the men and women that understand this have been silenced. Inside DOD, per the directive of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the last vestige of this inside the DOD, inside your military, has been washed clean as of 2 months ago. Silenced. The Muslim Brotherhood and other organizations, we'll talk about it, use the word Islamophobia. It is a direct assault on your right to free speech that was not given to you by your government. It was given to you by God Almighty. And our founders wrote that in our Declaration, that these rights are not to be touched. And everyone we're discussing today at the state, local, and federal level that is in a position of leadership swore an oath to the Constitution to protect and defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And when you say that I'm going to discard facts and an identifiable threat, so I won't offend somebody, you're violating your oath. At a minimum, it's professional negligence. When someone gets killed, example given, Fort Hood, that's criminal. People should be going to jail in those positions. Those are the facts on the table. And that's what we're going to walk through today. Let me set up this video because I think it highlights that little summary pretty well. And it's this. This is a joint hearing, Senate and congressional hearing on Homeland Security. The man asking the questions is Congressman Dan Lundgren from California, two-time Attorney General for the state of California. So he's not some guy that wandered in off the street. The man he is talking to, Mr. Stockton, is the senior man in the Pentagon for Homeland Security. Now I want you to observe this exchange. We'll see how deep and how far gone we are.
Secretary Stockton, are we at war with violent Islamist extremism?
No, sir. We are at war with Al-Qaeda.
My question is violent Islamist extremism at war with us?
No, sir. We are being attacked by Al-Qaeda and its allies.
Is Al-Qaeda, can it be described as being an exponent of violent Islamist extremism?
Al-Qaeda are murderers.
No,
ideological agenda.
That wasn't my question. My question was, is Al-Qaeda acting out violent Islamist extremism?
Al-Qaeda is a violent organization dedicated to overthrowing the values that we intend to advance.
Yes or no?
Can I hear the question again? I'll make it as clear as I can. We are not at war with Islam.
I didn't ask that. I did not ask that, sir. I asked whether we're at war with violent Islamist extremism. That's my question.
No, we're at war with Al-Qaeda and its
Al-Qaeda, how does Al-Qaeda define itself? Are they dedicated to violent Islamist extremism?
Al-Qaeda would love to convince Muslims around the world that the United States is at war with Islam. That's a prime propaganda tool, and I'm not going to aid and abet that effort to advance their propaganda goals.
Is there a difference between Islam and violent Islamist extremism?
Sir, with great respect, I don't believe it's helpful to frame our adversary as Islamic with any set of qualifiers that we might add. Because we are not at war with Islam.
I understand that. I never said we were at war with Islam. One of the questions we're trying to deal with is the radicalization of Islam, is the radicalization of Islamic youth. And if we can't distinguish between violent Islamist extremism and Islam, then all this stuff about behavioral indicators doesn't mean anything. Let me ask you this question. Is it a behavioral indicator to put on your card that you're a soldier of Allah?
A behavioral indicator that you have a copy of Inspire magazine on your desk?
That's not my question. My question is it a behavioral indicator to put on your card that you are a soldier of Allah, as Major Hassan did?
We have behavioral indicators now that enable our personnel, our supervisors, to focus on detecting indicators of violent extremism that reflect the lessons learned from Fort Hood.
Okay, is that a lesson learned? That you put soldier of Allah on your card, that you ought to follow up and investigate that?
We're training our supervisors to follow up on appropriate indicators and exercise the leadership they need in order to provide for effective reporting and information.
Do you agree with the statement of someone representing the Department of Defense on the weekend after the shooting that it would be a greater tragedy to lose our program of diversity than what had occurred?
Well, let me go back to something Chairman King said. I was trained up by Senator Moynihan. There is nobody less politically correct than Senator Moynihan. I follow the truth wherever it takes me, and I strongly support the programs of the Department of Defense that focus on Al-Qaeda and behavioral indicators.
I appreciate
This is not about political correctness. This is about defeating our adversary.
Sir, I would disagree with you that it may not be about political correctness. We are here talking about the fact that we now have to have behavioral indicators. I agree with that. But my question is, if someone gives inflammatory remarks, as did Major Hassan, in an open setting, if he has on his card that he was a soldier of Allah, it seems to me to be beyond common sense to think those are not behavioral indicators. So my question is, if I'm a member of the military today, and I see those two events or those two circumstances, would it be appropriate for me to report those as behavioral indicators? Now, that's not a question of whether or not you're being political correct, sir. I'm asking to answer that specific question. If I'm a soldier and ask you that question, what do you tell me?
Inflammatory rhetoric of the sort associated with Major Hassan that needs to be reported, and our officers are trained up now to report on that behavior.
Thank you, and I appreciate that.
How many of you think, as he said, that he follows the truth wherever it goes?
No.
How many of you think he thinks he follows the truth wherever it goes?
No.
I think he does.
Oh, I think he does. Yeah.
I think he thinks he does, but that's editorializing, so I'll let that pass. So the enemy that we face in this global war that we've been on several continents pulling triggers on is Al-Qaeda and only Al-Qaeda. I mean, I don't know anybody that actually believes that, except him and the people in the leadership in both parties. That is what I like to call, there are two things. It's a psychotic disconnect from reality. I mean, you need a bridge to span the Grand Canyon intellectually to get from one side to the other. That is simply nuts. But more, let me put the meat on the bone, that is unprofessional, and it's discarding facts. And in the world of war fighting, facts drives the war. 100% of the enemy that we're facing in this war says, they say